Hello and welcome to another Anyone Can Play Guitar video. In this one we're going to talk about minor scales, or specifically something called the natural minor scale. So there are other types of minor scales which we'll cover in a different video, but this is generally what people are talking about when they say a minor scale or a minor key, something like that. So we want to look at what that means and where that comes from, and we'll also do some playing to hear how it sounds. So theory-wise, we want to start with something that we should be familiar with by this point, which is our major scale. So just as an example, I've started with a G major scale, and on our circle we're going through whole, whole, half formula. We end up with all natural notes except for our F sharp. So F is our only sharp note. And so then what we did in some of the theory videos is we would give these notes scale degrees, so positions within the scale, which means that G is the first note of the scale, A is the second note, B is the third note, and so on and so forth. Alright, so it's pretty simple then to get from a G major scale to what it's known as its relative minor. So what's cool is that using just the G major scale notes that we already have, hidden within that group of notes is another scale, which would be the E minor scale, or technically the E natural minor scale. So the way we find which scale is built into that is by focusing on the sixth note, the sixth scale degree of a major scale, in this case the G major scale, and what we end up with is an E note. Alright, so then what we have to do, all we have to do to get an E minor scale is just spell out all the notes in the same order starting from E. And that's it. So here on the bottom we have an E natural minor scale, and as you can tell it's exactly the same group of notes. They go in, basically alphabetical order, except they're starting from an E. And you see that we've only got one sharp, there's that F sharp, and then everything else is natural. And so that's really it. Alright, so theoretically then, you're looking at this and thinking, well, it's the same group of notes, like what difference does it make if it starts with G or if it starts with E? And, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference on paper. What matters is what it sounds like. So to give you an example, let's look at a common chord progression, just in general, major or minor, and that would be the 1-4-5 progression. And what that means is we're going to play the chord built from the first note, the chord built from the fourth note, the chord built from the fifth note, and then we'll go back to 1. So we're going to take that chord progression, which is just a generic 1-4-5, and we're going to apply it to the G major scale, and we're going to hear how that sounds, and then we're going to apply the same thing to the E minor scale, and we'll hear how that sounds. So this is where your chord melody, or chord scale rather, stuff from the theory lessons comes into play. So if I'm looking at the one chord in the key of G, I know from my theory that that's a G major chord, because a chord built from the first note of a major scale is always major. Alright, then the chord built from the fourth note is also major, so that's C major. And the chord built from the fifth note of a major scale is also major, so D major. Alright, so you'll notice that what a 1-4-5 progression gives us is all the major chords that are in the key, in a major key. Alright, so here's how that might sound. I'll do a little bit of a recording of a loop so we can bring in the actual notes of the scale on top of it and hear how that sounds. Alright, here goes. There's my G major chord progression happening. So now if I play a G major scale over it, it'll sound pretty nice. Something like this. Okay, so that's that chord progression in a major key, and I played from our major scales videos, I played some major scales, some G major scale shapes over top of it, and it sounds great, right? All the chords that I played came from the key of G. All the notes I was playing were the notes of the G major scale, so you can basically play any note at any time over any chord and it'll sound pretty good. All right, it's hard to go wrong. So let's take that same chord progression, 1, 4, 5, and let's apply it to our E minor scale. All right, so everything's in a different order. So our one chord is no longer a G major chord, it's an E minor chord. All right, so why is it E minor? Well, if we remember from our chord scale, our first chord is major, second chord is minor, third chord is minor, fourth chord is major, fifth chord is major, sixth chord is minor, which makes sense since that's our relative minor, and then our seventh is diminished. Seventh chord is diminished. All right, so that means that when we go to a minor key, all of the chords are exactly the same. Again, they're just in a different order, or just from a different starting point, really. All right, so then if E is a minor chord in the key of G, it's also a minor chord in the key of E minor. All right, so then F sharp would be diminished, but now it's a 2 chord, so that's the difference. It's still the same chord, it's just in a different position. The third chord is major, fourth chord is major, or the fourth chord is minor, fifth chord is minor, 6 and 7 are both major and then back to minor. All right, so again, it's all the same chords, just starting from a different place, which means that if we play our 1, 4, 5 chord progression, we now would get an E minor chord as 1, an A minor chord as 4, and a B minor chord as 5. So our 1, 4, 5 progression is now accessing all of the minor chords that exist in a major key, in the key. All right, so if we play the same chord progression, it'll have a totally different tone to it. 1, because we're playing different chords, but 2, because we're playing minor chords instead of major chords. All right, so let's give this a shot, see if I can loop it better this time. All minors. Alright, now here's what's cool. We played G major scale over top of our chord progression in G major. What if we play a G major scale over top of this as well? Cool. So it should have sounded a little bit different, right? We played the same scale, the notes from a G major scale, but we played it over top of a chord progression of all minor chords, the key of E minor, and the whole tone of the thing sounded different, right? I was playing the same group of notes over both of those chord progressions, but because this one was in minor, was starting with a minor chord and including those minors, it gave the whole thing a different tone. And that really is the essence of a minor key, or of playing in something called a different mode. Modes is a whole other discussion, but this is kind of dipping your toes in the mode waters. So that's the basis of how that works. So what's cool is that these progressions create a sense of pull. So whichever chord I started on, the chord progression that I continued to play always kind of wanted to come back to that starting point. So when I start with G, I'm setting a tone. I'm saying this is a G major chord. You know, you can technically go in all kinds of different directions. You can do whatever you want, but with nothing else to go on except for I heard a G major chord, your ear is going to be expecting a certain thing based on what we've gotten used to hearing our whole lives. So here's listen to how, as I play this chord progression in the G major key, all the major chords that we did, when I get back to that G, it sounds like a resolution. Okay, we went off and did something, and now we're coming back, and it should have kind of a feel like it's a home, like we came back to where we wanted to be. Right? So now if I had done something like totally wacky like this, okay, I mean that's cool, that sounds like a neat thing, but I played a chord that really wasn't in the key, and it wasn't the one chord, and so our ears maybe were a little bit deceived, like, oh, okay, well I kind of thought you were going to go one way, but you went another way, all right? And that's, you know, an excellent tool, effect to be able to harness as you're, you know, going off and learning tunes and also writing your own tunes. You can absolutely do whatever you want, whatever you think sounds cool, and you can kind of toy with people and how they hear the music by maybe going in a way that they don't expect. Like, okay, I know it should go back to G to give this sense of resolution, but let's not do that. Let's go somewhere else and start a different journey or take a different path off this way. All right, so then if we do that same chord progression in our minor key, E minor, we should hear the same kind of pull, except instead of pulling to a G major, it'll pull to E minor, because that's what we're starting with. Cool, right? Same kind of sensation. It feels like, man, when I hit that E minor, that's what I wanted, that's what I felt like was going to happen, and then it did, and it's kind of, you know, satisfying. Okay, so the last little bit of this is that I mentioned a little bit at the top of the video that G major and E minor are related because you can find the E minor scale within the G major scale. And so that relationship is known as relative minor. Okay, so what I would say, the sentence would be, the relative minor of G major is E minor. All right? On the guitar, it's pretty easy to find because minor is just 3 half steps below. You know, to find the relative minor would be 3 half steps below the major. So let me play a G note here, third note of our third fret of our 6th string. If I go down 3 frets, 1, 2, 3, I get an E note. Guitar's tuned to E there, and that's my relative minor. All right, let's try a different one. So if I'm at D and I go down, I end up at B. So B minor would be the relative minor of D. If I'm on C and I go down, A minor would be the relative minor of C. So if you remember back from the circle of fourths lesson, where we looked at that circle, there's an inner circle, and those are known as the relative minors, right? So if you look at the G section, the inner circle that's next to that would be E minor, the one next to C would be A minor, and so on and so forth around the key. There you go. All right, so how that's useful, practically speaking, is that a lot of times, you know, we're getting into, you know, very predictable music territory, but a lot of times you'll hear a song in a major key for the choruses and the verses, and then when it gets to the bridge, like that one other part of the tune that kind of gets us back to the chorus that finishes the song off, it's very common to go to the relative minor to play that portion of the song. So let's do one last thing where I play both of these chord progressions back to back and just see how that works out. So here we go. Major key. One more time. Right? That kind of thing. And I even did a little bit of a walk up from the scale using that F sharp to kind of connect those two different keys. Okay, so that is something called, we covered the natural minor scale. So Other examples of minors, there's the Dorian scale, there's the melodic minor scale, there's other scales that have like minor qualities to them, something called Phrygian. These are modes. You have the harmonic minor scale, different things like this. So there are different kinds of minor, there are tons of them probably you can find, but the big one, the one that kind of, you know, the first place to start, best place to start, that kind of makes the most sense and is the most readily heard would be the relative minor. So as a little exercise, I would encourage you to, whenever you're picking out a key to play a song in, or you're playing a song off a tab or some sheet music that you're learning, just, you know, take a few seconds to consider, okay, are we in a major key? Are we in a minor key? If we're in the minor key, what's the relative major? So just go the other way around, go up 3 frets. And then if we're in the major key, what's the relative minor? Right? And I bet somewhere in your learning of tunes, you will come across a tune that starts in one key and goes to the other, goes from major to minor or minor to major. All right. Or maybe it's always in, the whole thing is in minor, but that kind of can help explain maybe why the song sounds the way it does. Like, oh, okay, it's in a minor key, so it's got, you know, a darker tone to it, or, you know, whatever words you want to describe, use to describe that kind of sound. Yeah, just take a minute to think about how major scales and minor scales are related, and then, yeah, it's just all the more cool stuff that you know. Somebody says, hey, we're playing in the key of D minor. Now you can go, oh, okay, D minor is the relative minor of F. So maybe off the top of my head, I don't know what all the chords are in D minor, but I do know what all the chords are in F, so you can use that to help fill in that gap. And then eventually, once you've done it enough times, they're just sort of synonymous with one another. You just know that D minor includes all the same notes and chords as F. All right, well, I think that's about it. You know, I'm using this cool looper pedal. If you've got some way to record yourself or loop yourself playing, this is a great way to do it. Pick a key, play the major chords, loop them, play your scales over top of it, just improvising, hitting whatever notes that are in the scale you want, to hear how they blend with the chords, and then try it in the minor key, mix majors and minors, you know, whatever. It's cool. But that's all I got to say about that. So if you've got questions or comments, leave them in the comments, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.